Today, this is a birds of a feather talk. It's meant to be more of an open format discussion. So I'm gonna open it, but I hope that we can pass the mic around and talk. So I'm gonna start out by reading what I wrote in the schedule. I also didn't know ahead of time they were gonna schedule this much time, but it's the end of the day, so. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about the needs of art production teams in games and other 3D verticals. I want to seed the discussion by highlighting the impact of technical art processes and frameworks which are needed for teams to thrive. And arguably, since humans started making art thousands of years ago, there's been a push and pull between the artistic and creative process and the technology we've harnessed to advance the arts. Video games have been around for half a century, yet technical art has only been acknowledged and respected as a viable career choice within the last 20 years. And we're only getting started. As more industries embrace the awesome power of immersive 3D, they, like game developers, will naturally find the need for individuals that are capable of grasping a working understanding of multiple disciplines. The new processes, tools, and workflows brought to life by technical artists are often key fundamental components of the constant change that is taking place in the field of game development and real-time 3D. Let's explore the gaps in O3DE content pipelines and workflows that are holding back production teams. So let's talk technical art. My name's Johnny Galloway. I'm a senior design technologist at AWS, but I have decades of experience making video games. I've been a technical art director. I was a producer at places like Atari and Rockstar Games and worked on big titles like Red Dead Redemption. My entire career, beyond some of that being a producer, has been focused on 3D content tools, workflows, production. I've been an environment artist and did lighting back in like PS3, PS4 games. But my jam is really procedural world building. So I think we can make bigger games better and faster. So who are you? Hopefully all of you are interested in technical art. And since this is a birds of feather discussion, I think it's for everyone. You might be a hobbyist, indie, or AAA game developer. You might come from other industries or verticals like automotive, fashion, you name it. 3D's everywhere today. I can talk to technical artists, environment artists, and level designers, obviously, but also rendering engineers. And hopefully you're interested in using the Open3D engine and freely open source software. So the key concepts that I would like everyone to walk away with are, I have these two mantras I've been focusing on this for years, which is zero to beautiful accelerated. I think that we can work faster. And to me, I want to take my time and money and make big, beautiful things that people remember. So I am all about executing quality at scale. So the things I think that are appropriate to seed the conversation with are, we can talk about content. We can talk about the tools and workflows. We can talk about engine features, and most importantly, what I would like to know is what's holding you back in production or keeping you from using Open3D engine. And of course, I gave another talk today that was more focused on procedural design toolkits, and I stole this slide from there. But to me, we should probably talk about Open3D engine, but we don't have to talk about only that. We can talk about 3D models, materials, texture maps, lighting, skyboxes, image editors, tool integrations, terrain data, like whatever you want to talk about. And if I can answer your questions, I'll certainly try. I think that's it. That's how I wanted to seed this. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to start with?
Johnny, how did you get started using Open3D? You personally, like when you have a new concept in mind, what's your first steps?
My first steps, well, making video games usually the first step for us was to go into an ideation phase. So I've written a lot of pitch decks and also created what I call vision decks, where I've collected a lot of reference material like imagery and put together a mood board. Sometimes worked with concept artists to start generating concept art, and then basically put together an executive pitch that can go in front of the people who are going to give me the money. A lot of times, though, we would build a prototype. So we would just start a new project. We would theorize what maybe the first 4 or 5 things that we wanted our game to accomplish or do differently, and we would try to build a demo that showed that we could do those things. So when I worked at Rockstar, we would often start with a 5-minute vibe piece where we would just collect clips of all the movies that we wanted to be the inspiration for the narrative and theme of the game that we were building. So when I worked on Red Dead Redemption, actually it was Red Dead Revolver, the first one, I think I watched 79 Western films from the 50s through the 90s that were handed to me by my bosses. And it was research. So I spent a couple months just being a cowboy, which is probably why I moved to Austin. But I've gotten started in a lot of different ways. So the demo that I gave earlier this week was seeded with, I don't have a lot of time to do this, but I do know how to use the engine, probably better than most people because I helped make it. But I don't have the time to make content, so I went out to Sketchfab and online with Google, and I tried to find as much freely available content as possible and see how much I could put together with as little effort as possible. So I think actually it was this. And you can see here, this is not a fully realized video game level, but it has most of the parts of a video game level. There's a character controller in here. You can walk around the terrain. It's planting, tens of thousands of objects on the terrain. It has HDR lighting and skyboxes. And so I just started throwing it together. And I think that the first couple days, it was pretty ugly. And a few days later, I had some nice lighting and a skybox. And the last thing I did was this pyramid, which took me like maybe a couple hours. If you walk up to it, it doesn't look good at all. It just looks good from a distance. But it's enough to kind of show that, yeah, today in O3DE Engine, you could just get started and start building things within a couple hours. So, yes?
What was the hardest part to accomplish of that finished scene?
Well, balancing my day job with the conference and spending time, because content creation, I think, is probably I don't even think it's arguable. Content creation is the most expensive part of video game development. A game like Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2 had at least 1,000 developers working on it, and at least 800 of them were content creators or other creative professionals. So you think about that, and you think about the number of tools and disciplines that are in play, right? You're talking about people who are very specialized and highly competent in their ability to create things. And what's interesting is that many verticals don't necessarily want to spend the time or money to become competent in those tools and workflows, or the money to hire people that are. Or simply they may not have the budget to do so. And I'll let you know, I'm pretty sure that when I worked on GTA San Andreas, that we spent at least $25 million in development, probably 5 years at least in core development, and we probably spent $25 million on just marketing that game. And this was 15 years ago or more, so I don't even know what they spent making games like Red Dead Revolver 2, right? But we're talking games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars probably, but they generate $1 billion in profits, so they can probably afford to hire 800 artists, but not everybody can. So does that answer your question? Do you want to go further?
Yeah, I was thinking in O3DE, accomplishing this render, what piece of content was maybe the hardest to craft or find?
To me, I think it was all the decorative objects that are placed on the terrain. show you up close. I don't have a screenshot of it, but like the cacti are like rendered. If you go up to them, they even have like needles, you know. The grass is high enough fidelity that I made it so you could make a patch and it looked pretty realistic. I think the things that look the least realistic is that I used freely available content. So I didn't have a lot of control over the full quality, but I did my best to bring them into Maya or Blender and tune them up a bit. I changed the color on texture maps. But I didn't have time to make every cactus and piece of brush and rock by hand. That would have taken me weeks or months. The other thing is I think you have to have a really good understanding of physically based rendering from the material authoring standpoint, as well as how you light a world. So lighting, energy levels. If you want to get very, very technical, you could actually build what I would call a virtual spectrometer, place it in the train and measure how much inbound light is coming from the skylight, the directional sun, and other energies. And you can treat the engine today almost like it's a DSLR camera. So I think that in today with high dynamic range graphics, we just have a lot of complexity that's in play with creating beautiful art. But my hope has always been that we can just help people get into that more easily, understand it more easily, but not have to have it seem as complex as it does on the surface sometimes. So I know Yuyi and I have been working for years on trying to make content tools and workflows more intuitive and easier to get into. So, but this scene is also problematic because of it's approaching the scope of fidelity that is hard to do on a single machine. While the editor and other DCC tools are running, they consume a lot of resources. And so I had to reduce the space of the level about a quarter of the size I wanted to, so that I could work on it in real time and still have my other tools open. But now that it's built, you could very easily just tweak some numbers and arbitrarily expand the size of the environment and it would just work. So, any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you're talking about like finding assets was one of the hardest parts. Is that something you think O3DE could help solve by producing like asset packs or some like just groups of like free assets that people could be like, oh, I want a bunch of stuff for deserts. Go grab rocks and like basically all the stuff you pull together there could be useful to have somebody just like a package ready to go that we use to build something out.
Yeah, totally. I think that other engines and efforts are enhanced by the ability to just grab things off the shelf and go, you know? And whether it's low cost, like buying an asset pack, or freely available. But yeah, I mean, to me, actually, the holy grail is portable content that I can make it or buy it once and it works across a range of technologies or engines. Every single object in this scene, I had to touch. So I had to fix UVs, re-export models, create UVs if they didn't exist, set up LODs, apply materials or change materials. Like, it was a lot of work just to do something that I think is relatively simple. And I mean, it's not very complex. But another way we could go is auto generation or AI generation of assets. It would be really cool to me if you could just describe that I wanted a desert landscape and in front of my eyes it just started appearing. You know, and I think we have technologies that can do that, but I think if you look at like Get3D, which is an NVIDIA technology, where you can use natural language to describe that I want a 3D model of a horse, and it will give you a couple permutations of that. That takes 8 A100 CPUs to basically run at any reasonable rate. And the results that it feeds you back certainly look like a horse at a distance, but if you get up close to it, it looks like mush. right? It's very not complete. And so I think that those sort of tools are going to be great in the next decade to start projects, to start ideation, to get rough assets in place. And then you're going to have people go into production and make the art that actually ships in the product. But does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, you answered my
Yeah.
question as well.
Oh.
The last part of answering that question. Can you elaborate on the tools that are currently in existence that will help generate content?
Yeah, the ones I know of are probably well known to a few people at least, but if you go on TikTok, I mean, you'll just get a stream of like AI generated art coming from Stable Diffusion or Wombat. But I think we're at a point where if I'm using Blender, I can go get a plugin, and all I have to do is sign up for Stable Diffusion on a website and get my API key and plug it in. And inside of Blender, I can just type in a descriptive text that says, I would like a sandy texture map. And it will generate a sand material and place it on an object. I've seen other people who have done the same thing, but inside of, say, Maya, they could say, you know, I would like an alien landscape on a planet as concept art, and a matte painting will just appear in the backdrop of the 3D viewport, you know? And I think that's really cool, because you're like, I know what I think I want it to look like, and if the text turns into the imagery that you expect and you're happy with it, that's just a great result. And it doesn't take you all the way. I think you could probably build a couple simple games that only needed a matte painting as the backdrop, you know, and you could make that look beautiful. Like you could build a match 3 game that just had generative art in the background or something. But I don't think that we're close to building 3D worlds with these tools. I think it's around the corner, but I still think it's years away. But I've also seen people make what I would call, when we create characters, we do like concept art. The initial concept art might be a mood piece, so that character in an environment with a cool pose and a sword. But when you go to model it, we draw that character in a T-pose from the front, and then we draw him from the side with a profile. And we use those images in a 3D modeling tool to go in and begin to actually create that character. And I've seen people use Stable Diffusion or AI technologies to build those views, like the top-down or side views of a vehicle or a character. So at least they can get that ideation phase in place, and then they still have to go build the 3D model, but it helps them get started. And I think that's what's going to be the coolest thing, is just, I don't know where to start, so I'm going to start typing and looking and generating, and oh, I like that one, so let's head in that direction, you know? So, does that answer your question?
Well, the more you can elaborate, the better. This is all really great information. It makes me think of another question as you're talking about that. You had mentioned when you opened up the discussion that, you know, the content creation is one of the most expensive parts of creating a game. And I'm just wondering now, after you talking about the things you just talked about, when you have 800 content creators, does that also equate to the length of time that it takes to create a game? Or, you know, can you speak a little bit about the schedule of a game? Because you hear that, you know, they take years to produce. Is that because there's so much content, or is there other things that are taking place that slows the game development down, or is it just basically years worth of development, developing the content?
I can speak to my own anecdotal experience. I've worked, for instance, on a PlayStation 3 game that took 5 years from beginning to end. And we spent at least the first 12, probably 18 months just building prototypes and what we called a vertical slice. And a vertical slice being like, I have 16 worlds in my game, I'm only going to build a portion of one, but I can build the whole vertical. So I could create a building on a corner that aesthetically looks like part of Chinatown, and I could place a convenience store or a gas station next to it. I can have a vehicle that's parked on the sidewalk. I can have a character that can get in and out of the car, and that character can run around. And maybe I can go no further than like a fenced-off park that's near these buildings, and that mostly it's a facade, but I can see what my game is going to look like, and I can show people that it's interactive, that it runs at a reasonable frame rate, and I can kind of instill in them this vision of what this final product is going to be. But then easily, like the middle 3 years of that 5 years is just churning iteratively over and over and over and over on content. So we go through phases where I would say we have pre-production, mid-production, and then final production. But pre-production, we'd build a lot of block-out models. So we might have a gameplay test and use facsimiles of buildings that are really rough. It's the same size and the same shape of the building, so I can visualize what this macro layout looks like on the landscape. And over there is a boulder, but it doesn't have any materials on it, and I don't know what the lighting's going to look like, and there's no special effects or fog. But I can iterate on that block out, or sometimes they call it orange boxing. I don't know why. I think people create levels with orange materials on them so that you're not focused on the art, you're focused on the fun. But they do these layouts. And then when that layout feels fun, we start saying, okay, well, that box over there is going to turn into a crate. And this, this room over here is going to be a lab. And that one over there is going to be the machinist shop. And we start creating themes and making specs for art. And then we just start building all of those things. But what's crazy to me is that the amount of time that we spend paying people to do non-creative menial work like creating UVs or generating LODs, when those things we've begun to automate those things, right? But those are non-creative tasks that are part of the technical art content creation workflow. And so to me, that generative AI approach should also not only be the beginning of work, but maybe the end of work too, where I can offload tasks to procedural mechanisms that do the LOD generation and make things optimal. And the way I like to look at that is I believe that what we're really doing is we're not removing artists from the equation, we're not reducing creativity, we're reallocating time. And so a smaller group of people can now build bigger, more beautiful, more high fidelity environments in less time. Because they don't have to do those other tasks. They can focus all of their efforts at scaling production and making it look good right in the middle. And then late production is mostly optimization and bug fixing, right? And that's months of testing. And we usually art lock like, I don't know, I think most games I've worked on art locked 6 to 9 months at least before they shipped, right? And then we would only change the art if it was because it was part of a bug, And so production studios often will have 2 games going and they'll overlap and they start pulling people off one game as they ramp up and start the next, right? So that I think most successful like AAA game dev studios probably have 2 or 3 teams and 2 or 3 projects that are in different phases of development so that they can cycle their people through all of that work. So I hope that answers your yes, John.
It occurs to me that as an experienced game developer and technical artist in particular, it's not just that you know how to do all the things, including all the ticky-tacky ones you just say aren't creative, you know how important they are. And even if we have new technologies that automate quite a bit of them, you're still talking about requiring human beings to verify that it's actually the way you want it to look. So when you ask, as you started off, you're looking for ways to let more people get into using the technology, it occurs to me that, especially for the higher scope games, there's just going to be a whole lot of opportunities for human beings to be needed to make sure that even if you don't know what you need at hand, you know where to look for it. You know how to adapt current technology into a workflow that will produce the game you want to make. But obviously, not everyone can be a technical artist, but obviously that's your whole experience, that's what you do. So maybe you're just hoping that more people can think like a technical artist and be able to step between the two worlds like you do?
Maybe. I mean, I'd like to be sometimes less technical, like be in the creative flow. I'm technical probably because I started making games when it was flat shaded polygons. And I think one of the first 3D games I worked on, we actually modeled the ships and aircraft on graph paper and then plugged the numbers in manually into a text file that got converted into binary and then loaded in the engine. And the iteration cycles were extremely slow. And it was hard to iterate. And so, what I start doing is building tools. I'm gonna make that better, And I like making technology and I like making features. But when I think maybe 1/3 of my career has been focused on technical art. And there's a reason I don't talk a lot about, but one of the reasons why I did that is because I see how much my team is struggling. And what I want to do is make it easier for them to make art or focus on art or build their vision. And so if I can take the competencies that I have and apply them in other ways that remove clicks or free up time or automate processes, that makes their quality of life better, and it actually makes a better product in the end. So do I think it's important? Yes, but it's not the fanfare, right? It's like, I didn't make the character, I'm not the most skilled ZBrush artist, and I don't necessarily want to be either, right? But I would like to take technical art and make it be more about scope, that procedural, arbitrarily large size worlds that are described semantically, right? I mean, that's my dream, I guess. But what do you like to do?
I just like seeing people do what they're supposed to be doing. And that's a big question by itself, because the process of life is figuring that out. You fail a lot, and you learn through failure. And sometimes the project itself can be a measure of that failure, but you ideally can learn from it. But you and I have been talking about in and out of this, is that there don't seem to be enough people who know how to make this whole interactive entertainment software thing that we generally refer to as video games, but at least people know why they play video games for amusement. And the way they look and the way they perform are certainly part of, whether or not they're interesting or not. But it also seems like there's lots of vaguely interactive software media that we're talking about at this conference that are not necessarily video games, but it sure seems like a lot of people who've been making nothing but video games as you have for most of your career know a lot about those things. So maybe we should be talking to the people that know how to make video games if we want to make a metaverse. I don't know.
Yeah, how do we make a metaverse? I think that's a question on everyone's mind. It's not like we have a 3D scanner in everyone's home and you can just make your digital avatar like that, And we do have cool technologies where you can use your phone and capture yourself and transfer it to a 3D model. Metahumans even let you do that, and metahumans can not just make really high quality human avatars, but stylized ones as well. And so I think that's actually a great example of a tool that is trying to make something like high fidelity characters easy for anyone to make, because they've made it mostly knobs, right? I can visually pick what the head shape looks like, place the hair on it, style it, pick the eye color, and it's just like character creators from video games 10 years ago, only with more features, right? And so that's cool. But what happens when I want to bring Gustav the Mighty, my 35-pound chihuahua, into a game? There's no tools for quadrupeds, and how do I deal with pet dragons and things that people love in fantasy video games? There's I think metaverse is cool, and today I think we can talk about putting my Instagram art in painting frames on a wall in a virtual space that you and I can walk around and talk about together. But at the end of the day, how interesting is that after doing it for 20 or 30 minutes, you know? So like, what is the metaverse and how do we build it? What is the metaverse?
That's a good question. What is the metaverse?
Yeah. Well, how do we build it?
What do we build it?
Even Facebook.
Yeah.
I did a research study with how many thousand people just about what makes a compelling, avatar or person, and they ended up being inclusive because they had like a set standard of like you do a 3D scan, you create a stylized character, and then they would ask people like, what do you think of this? And someone would be like, I don't like it, it looks too much like my ex-boyfriend. It was just a random head that they had smiling and stuff. So like people were triggered by like different, so they're like, okay, well let's make it more realistic. So it just ended up this giant inclusive study. So they ended up to this point where it's like, we have to give them more creative control. Or like you had mentioned right now, when we were talking about the early version of the slide. So you have to just let them do their thing and just let them move. So yeah. So the answer is even in the construction of
Yeah. But like if I want to drive a Bugatti around in the metaverse, how's that going to happen? Right?
Does everyone get a Bugatti? Only some people.
I don't know. Do you have to buy the Bugatti?
If Oprah's there, everybody gets a Bugatti.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
It's tricky what you're talking about with giving people a lot of power over customizing things, because that introduces a whole other problem space of content that other people might not want to see.
Yeah, digital rights, right?
Well, the rights, but also just like ethics side of stuff, I guess. If somebody wants to walk around naked in the metaverse, like somebody else might not want to see that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like, you could just talk about fashion, which is one of the easier things to tackle in production. Virtual clothing, they have programs like Marvelous Designer, where you can put together virtual fashion, put it on a model, render it realistically, simulate the cloth, and even take that all the way into a video game now, which is cool. And I've even seen people using AI generative art to be like, but I'm going to have the AI design the fashion, you know? But then, yeah, like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I think when I read that book, what I walked away with is that, like, quality is subjective and beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? So a metaverse can't be policed except by the people experiencing it, right? Which places a whole metaphysical conversation on top of the whole thing, right? Yeah. And I don't think you can ever answer some of those questions. I do remember when I made a game called Starhawk, which is before Fortnite, but it was a build and battle game. So you could go out into these 16, 20 square kilometer maps, and I could call down these structures from space, like a tank pad and a turret and a bunker and all these things. And so I'm creating the environment, at least from the gameplay standpoint. Like, I'm creating bases, and every time I play, the base is different and your base is different. So the gameplay continues to evolve through strategies because of that difference. There's that emergence that's in play. But I remember having the conversation that, why don't we let people just build the levels instead of us building them, right? And we had a whole set of collaborative construction tools that let 16 of us jump in and build levels together. We could have shipped that tool set to the world, but we didn't know how to stop people from making things that weren't fun or didn't look good. And so we chose to not do that. But then you have examples like Little Big Planet, where they do give people all of the tools, but also the democratization to decide by a community what is good by allowing it to float to the top. And I don't know how they police some of these other problems, like not safe for work and other things that are bound to show up, which has occurred in games like Besiege, which was a physics-based game where you could build contraptions. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation. But I don't have any answers to it. So, Like, what do you want to do? What do you want the metaverse to be?
I don't know.
No?
MMOs, I think we should consider it out.
That makes it easy for me to be a technical artist because I can just focus on breaking it down to the atomics that people need to build whatever that they want, whether it's car paint or rubber, 3D models, interactivity. And so I can remove myself from a lot of those conversations by having myself focus on the small parts or I think of it like Mike Balfour does with a Lego minifig. You can buy a fully baked character that has all of its bits, or you can go buy a bag of Lego bricks and you can build whatever you want. And there are people who like doing both of those things, right? And me, I like building Lego bricks so people can build anything they want. But any other questions? Anyone have any thoughts?
What is everyone's thought on device-to-device user experience? For instance, emojis. Emojis today, you look at an iPhone, it's different than a Samsung or whatever. Do all user experiences have to represent the same assets, or can they be different?
I think of that problem similarly to the holy hand grenade in Ready Player One. If the holy hand grenade works in the Monty Python world, what happens when I take it to Doom world? Right? How do I describe what a holy hand grenade is semantically? And then how is that interpreted based on the experience it's being brought into, right? And I think that we have most of the tools we need to do a lot of that semantic description. I don't think that we have good ways to solve the problem of per experience interpretation. Because what if Zelda weapons just don't fit in, Cooking Mama or something? You can't really merge those things. But I remember making games when I made flight simulators, and I wanted to make a game where you could fly your A-10 into an enemy base, get out of it, run into the base, shoot some stuff, steal some stuff, run back out of the base, get in your plane, and everyone told me I was crazy. You'll never be able to do that. You're mixing genres, it's impossible. And a few years later, something like Grand Theft Auto came out. So maybe someone will solve these problems, But I'd like to think that I could create things like a holy hand grenade and have digital rights attached to them and metadata to describe them so that at least you have an API where you know what health is or damage, and that I can tell you what it looks like in a photoreal world, and you can reinterpret that in your stylized world maybe. But at least I can tell you what I think a holy hand grenade is, down to every piece of detail that an engine would need to interpret it, right? And I think you could say the same thing for a Bugatti. It's just a lot more parts, right?
But it still has to look like a Bugatti, right?
Yeah.
In order to fit their branding, it still has to, and someone to have digital rights on it still has to look similar enough to a Bugatti, that it holds up those branding style.
Yeah.
And there's a Lego Bugatti that you can buy, which is, clearly they're taking a lot of liberties.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting there is what happens when I get into the Bugatti, and now we have these massive wraparound media displays, right, that are running probably either custom versions of something like Android Auto or some other operating system that now, do I have to emulate that operating system and all of those graphics as well to give you the full Bugatti experience? Yeah. Seems pretty complex, yeah.
Of course.
And that driver's cockpit to some people is the Bugatti experience, right? That's a driver's car, so. Any other questions or thoughts people want to talk about? Yes?
What is your best guess on how long it will be before we have something comparable to Ready Player One?
Oh, I don't know. The part of me that wants to be a futurist and reads, science fiction, I'm like, oh yeah, I believe Ray Kurzweil when he says that, the singularity is going to happen at X date and time, and then it seems to get it delayed every 10 years, right? It's like when people come and ask me, well, making content's easy, right? So you can just put this demo together in 2 weeks. I tell people it's probably going to take at least 3, maybe 5 times as long as you think it's going to. And I think that probably holds true for this sort of thing. So I might say it's here in a decade, which really means that it's 50 years possibly, maybe 20, 30. Because that's massive scope and scale right there for Ready Player One. But I think we'll see things like that. I know that I've seen some experiences in something like the Wave, which used to be the Wave VR, but I think it's the Wave XR. But you can go into like a virtual Burning Man-like experience where you have a virtual desert and you just wander in that direction and you run into some friends. You might know them, you might not, but you can play digital instruments together in the deep desert, and you can walk to someone's cave that they put together and put all of the decorative objects into. That was probably one of the first times that I saw something that I would describe that was like what I thought the metaverse might be, where it had some element of collaboration in its construction and a shared experience. But the craziest thing I saw was when I went to a Twitch party at South by Southwest, and I was on the dance floor and there was a DJ, but the DJ had a capture suit on while he was DJing. But if you went and sat in the corner and put on a VR helmet, you were in a digital dance floor with the same DJ, only the DJ was like 2 stories above everybody. So it was playing with scale, but that to me was that blending the real world with the non-real world, but having an experience of some kind like the music and the dance floor that is that bridge that seamlessly brings me between them. And I could enter and exit the virtual aspect of that experience at any time, which was really cool. So I could imagine, like, there's this really cool book by Werner Vinch. It's called, I think, Rainbow's Edge. And in it, there's a version of Windows called Windows Epiphany. And everyone has contact lenses that allow the real world to be reskinned. And I remember a scene where they were driving down the Pacific Coast Highway and a reproduction of like a 1960s hot rod or something. But in their mind, what they were seeing and experienced, that the Pacific Coast Highway in 2057 or whatever year it was reskinned to 1967, the year that they wanted to experience. And that book talks a lot about AI being part of making that type of experience a reality, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I think even when I read modern science fiction that talks about some of these things, like the date people are imagining is like, there's a book called 2041. It's a really good book. It's, I think, 10 different stories. Each one talks about how AI and these sort of technologies will impact different aspects of our life. And it at least one of those stories, maybe multiple, cover the type of conversation that we're having. And so people out there who are specialists in the field, which I certainly am not, they're looking at that sort of date, like 2040, 2050 is when maybe all of this becomes a standard everyday thing, that like having an iPhone in our pocket or something. So those are just my thoughts. Anyone else have thoughts about that? No?
I played Pong in the 70s,
Yeah.
so you're probably right, somewhere around 50 years.
Yeah.
I think we're a long way on the hardware side of things still. Like, a lot of people are talking about the software side of the problem, but I feel like stuff like VR, AR is in its infancy now, and that's a long ways to go. To remove the barriers of like, so it's so isolating right now, and the gear is just relatively heavy and expensive, and making it where it'd be very easy to go in and out of a virtual world and seamless. I think we're a ways from that stuff.
Yeah. I'm lucky because I've worn glasses my whole life.
Yeah.
So I'm used to putting things on and off my face. But Yeah.
Get it as lightweight as glasses. I mean, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Contact lenses, but how do you power them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think concentrating on visuals has been part of the problem as well. Like you have a whole host of other senses that need to be immersed for it to be ready for that one level.
Yeah,
And
it's true.
transmitted to, like, something has to be able to take your body movements, your facial expressions, all that, and transmit it to
We're
your
actually closer to
We're getting
capturing your pose, and being able to transmit that, sending, like, I'm touching a table to your fingers. That's the thing that's hard.
and giving the feedback from there.
Yeah, I just think Apple, their take on it is you have earbuds, you have glasses, you have all these Apple products. The processor for the glasses that are running your phone, and so that's their goal. Instead of the HoloLens where it's all built in, you know. So, I mean, outside of the VR sense with the AR, you know. So, I wonder if it's going to be more compartmentalized. I know you're going to say something.
I mean, it won't be the metaverse if it's Apple only. So there's that.
It might finally be the form factor that get people to actually want to wear them, right? I mean,
True.
it's a marginal piece of the society that wants to wear them now.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's like, I feel like that part of my life that felt the most almost metaverse-like was like 15, 20 years ago when World of Warcraft first came out, and me and all my friends were all playing the same game, and we would all get together in the same world at night, and that's what we talk about in the daytime too. And it's like, how would, like, a metaverse, are you going to get everybody to commit to kind of the same space, and it not just be this fragmented thing where, well, okay, 10 different companies have 10 different metaverses, and
Yeah.
everybody uses a different one, and like, it's not really that shared experience.
What if it becomes so random and ADD that, like, you've spent all this time building an experience and people do it for 10, 15 minutes and then they move on to the next thing? Like the 3-minute experience, like TikTok or something. Like TikTok's great, by the way. I love TikTok. And I see lots of cool stuff on TikTok that's related to this conversation. Like they have AI programs where you can take an image of yourself you captured on your phone doing a dance, and you upload it to a service, and it generates all of the animation files for it and sends it back. So it's pretty cool. But you have to put all of those technologies kind of together to have that immersive experience that includes everything, right? The visuals, the sound, the animation, the materials, the lighting, and all of that, yeah. So, yeah, John.
As you brought up World of Warcraft, it reminded me that 25 years ago, about 3 weeks ago, September 24th, 1997, was the launch date for Ultima Online. Made here in Austin, Texas. It was a skunkworks project. Most of the people involved had no idea how important that was going to be, how it was going to define a whole genre of video game experiences, how it basically invented DevOps, because they didn't just launch it, they had to keep operating on it and just keeping the thing online and responsive, as well as adding more content to it, and yet people are going to continue treating it like a service, the game as a software service. It also created things like human moderation for player behavior, and that's kind of what we were talking about briefly when it was kind of my fault for bringing up the metaverse. Sorry about that. Like I said, a lot of this stuff has been addressed to a degree in the field of entertainment. I mean, again, we knew why we were playing those games because it was supposed to be fun, and when it stopped being fun, we usually stopped playing. Not always.
Not always,
sometimes.
yeah.
Usually, at least there was an understood explanation for why we did it. So I'm only bringing this up to reiterate, there's a lot of things that we don't need to reinvent the wheel to.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information that still is out there if people know where to look, like a technical artist does.
Yeah, but the problem is, like, even though I'm competent and I can teach people, like, I don't know if I can teach them enough fast enough before it's either out of date or I'm not here anymore, And if these things have such a long pull, how do you keep the cycle of interest and the transfer of knowledge going until things arrive where we all imagine they may in the future. So, but I do remember in, what was the other MMO before Warcraft? EVE Online? EverQuest. I remember I logged in one day and I had lost all of my stuff. And I was like running around in just the base uniform, and I was like, oh, dang, what happened? But I was able to talk to someone that was like a real game master running around in a gnome outfit, and they like looked through my account and saw where the data was lost, and they were able to magically restore most of my things, you know? I thought that was pretty cool. So you're right, I think that, I mean, we know how to do customer service, and we know how to do it in scaled environments like this, so maybe we don't need to relearn that piece.
We do, but here's the thing about software companies. A lot of times, they want to solve all the problems with software. And that's one of those things that's very difficult if you don't have a human element. I mean, yeah, that person doing the job had to use software to get it done, but there's ethical considerations. You don't want to just entirely leave that to machines. And when to use the tools that's available, again, these are human decisions to make.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't want to take humans out of the equation, right?
Solve a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah. I mean, I just think about how often I call my mom and still ask her for advice, you know? And yeah, so. Any other questions or things people want to talk about? Yes.
You mentioned not having enough time to teach people what they need to know, and that's one of your concerns. How long does it take someone who's an artist who's interested in actually using O3DE to start actually doing some really cool and amazing things?
I hope today getting started takes very little. But going all the way, you know, is just sweat equity and hard work. But yeah, you'll have things that you need to learn along the way.
When you say very little, like, you said you did this in basically, it sounded like about 20 hours?
Yeah, I'd say over 2 weeks I put this together.
Yeah, so maybe 80 hours to do this?
Probably.
So a new person that's never used O3DE, how long would it take them to like replicate what you've done before?
You know, there's probably some kid out there that could do it in half the time already. But you know, I think that when I got started, that a lot of the hurdles were just technology. Like my first point-and-click adventure game, some of the rendered frames took a farm of 8 Macintoshes to render a 320 by 240 image, like 16 hours, 24 hours. And we had to do that across thousands of images, you know. So that game, I could say that making the 3D models and environments was probably the like easy part. It just took forever to render that stuff. And now we can do that in real time. I could say on Starhawk, the game before that was Warhawk. And Warhawk had 4 worlds. And those worlds were like maybe 4 square kilometers. And I remember having a conversation with my boss. And he said, hey, Johnny, I want this next game to have 16 worlds. And I was like, that sounds cool. So we're going to hire a bigger art team, right? He's like, no. I want you to figure out how to do it with the people that we have. And I was like, okay. And he's like, and I want them to be 16 square kilometers or larger. And I was like, what? So I worked with people like Brendan in this room, and we worked a lot on tooling. And I'll say that we spent at least 18 months making a build machine that cost probably 25 grand just to make the build machine that could crunch world data, all offline, down to, I think, a streaming system that would quantize the placement of things to remove some of the data, pack everything so that we could stream it both off the hard disk and the DVD running concurrently to get all that information on screen. But now I can do that all in real time like I showed earlier today, right? Which is pretty cool, right? I mean, 12, 15 years ago, we were crunching all of this data, and it took a long time just to crunch the data. Sometimes I think we had 1 or 2 worlds that would take 2 days to crunch the data, you know? And then if there was a bug in the build machine, that was 2 lost days on a $25,000 machine. But I can just do most of it in real time now. Like, that's cool. So I'd say that how long it takes changes quite a bit along with technology cycles. So some part of it just comes down to it's the experience gained by creating complex things that allows you to understand how to disassemble something into its atomic parts, how to get down to that semantic description, and then pull all the little bricks together that let you reassemble that thing in a procedural way like I've done here, right? And some of that is tinkering and some of that is just knowledge gained over time. But if we make the tools easy enough to use that you don't have to think about the tools, you can spend all of your time just gaining that knowledge, right? And tinkering with those problems and solving them. And then hopefully you're working on a team where you can transfer knowledge easily, right? Because only one person needs to solve a problem. But if you can get that solution to 30 other people, that's the value, right? So we need better collaboration tools as well, better ways to transfer knowledge. Like, none of us are gonna just do this magically on our own in a vacuum, right? And I don't know what the answer to some of those things are. But I'd like to think that we could be in a world collaborating on its layout and design, and that as an art director sitting on the beach with a martini in hand, that I could just tell you that I don't like that statue or where it's placed, and that I could just circle it, annotate it, make a comment, and the next time Ken or someone else opens that statue in a 3D modeling package, the annotation is just put in their face. Like, someone asked for this change to occur. And I don't have to go hunting for it. They don't have to hunt for me. We just have these collaborative tools that, like, bring those solutions to us directly, right? I think we need to build those things into the tool set. So,
Kind of wondering if you want to talk more about, I was thinking, you've had kind of an interesting journey on the collaboration side of things because you've worked on, you know, some very large teams that had to have like as far as collaborating with each other back when the tools were worse than they are today, and also working in places like MaxPlay where we're trying to solve that. I'm wondering, like, where do you think things are going with collaboration on getting, you know, teams of hundreds of people to be able to all work on one project in a way that's seamless or less seamful just now?
I think there's probably at least 2 frequencies there. One is the creative collaboration you and I and a handful of people are doing in real time to see the vision through, but the tasks at hand, like a landscape or a layout. I think you probably can't collaborate at that frequency with more people than you can fit in a Zoom call. There's too much noise. And I don't think that you want hundreds of people stomping data in the same environment at the same time. So I think that you want session-based collaboration at that scale. And I think that that scale of collaboration and change needs to be diffable so that you can accept or reject changes that are made from the previous version. And I think back to something we called tweak files when I was working on Starhawk. But then the other frequency, it's like production at a film studio where I have 100 artists, and as a technical art director or an art director or a creative director, I need to be able to communicate my changes, my needs, or the needs of the people above me that are paying the bills down to like a large group of people. I think that we need collaboration tools that let us do things like dailies, right? But in a more fluid way. So like when I think about O3DE Engine, I've worked on big pieces like Python, having Python in the editor, not just so that you can make tools, but automate processes. But I like to think that I could place a camera at a specific location in a level and have it be there from the first day that level was created to the last day before we shipped the game. And that every night I could run an automated process on that point in 3D space and that view and have a streamline of visual change over time. Because if I can do that and I can upload it to an S3 bucket, then I have my dailies for large-scale virtual environments that we can all sit around and review. I can pop up on a web page, and we don't have to be in the editor engine at the same time. My battery's gonna die. But I'd like to think that even those screenshots that have some sort of deep knowledge of the scene that they're representing, so pixel masks of some kind with embedded metadata might be like, I not only have rendered the pixels for that statue that's sitting here, but I've tagged those pixels so that you know what the statue is, and I can backtrace it to the asset ID, and I can give you a grease pencil circle and annotation with comment that makes it all the way back to the source. Like, we can build that, and that would be amazing for large-scale teams.
We'd have to have some kind of space online that everything was synchronized so that all those processes could be run and distributed. That's
Yeah.
cool idea.
Yeah, it'd be like really cool if you had a game engine that was like Google Docs for game development.
Oh.
I mean, I was gonna say, like, it seems like an important point for the future is teams will not rarely be in the same location anymore. Like,
Yeah.
800 people in one office is expensive enough to maintain. I guess to make a certain level of profit just to keep it going. 100 people in one office and 100 people in a different country that's much cheaper, that seems likely, and that needs that kind of iterative feedback to be fast.
Yeah, super fast. Because the crazy thing, like context switching, I think is one of the things that slows me down the most. Is like, if I'm in a flow and I can work on the same thing for 3 days or 3 months, that's great. But the second that someone comes in and says, but can you do X, Y, or Z? I'm like, deer in headlights, like what? And then, oh, okay, yeah, let me think about that for a minute. Oh, okay, I can do that. But then I completely forgot what I was doing, you know? And so, yeah, rapid change, right? Better tools for communicating change, I think are super important, for sure. And yeah, I haven't worked with a in-office development team for, well, a long time now. So, and we still manage to get stuff done. So I think we've kind of solved some parts of this problem, right? Yeah.
You brought up a good point, actually, though, the analogy to a Google Doc. Has anybody tried to get 100 people into a single Google Doc and actually edit it at the same time? No. There's no need to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in our case, this would be common.
Yeah. We've played with this idea before, some.
Yeah, do it. The Google Docs for game development is.
Yeah. There's a tagline. Ken and I worked on an engine that was called Max Play Game Development System, but it was predicated on all your data in the cloud. And then the core technology was streams of change, right? Like that's the core that you need, but then we're like, oh, but we also need to build our own source control or source control integrations, and how do I communicate what Ken is doing or what Ken is selected, or, you know, like, how do I make sure that Guthrie and Ken are not trying to select and move the same object in the same space? It becomes super chaotic very, very quickly, you know, and yes, Yui.
Figma already solved the solution, sort of. So I'm wondering how can we use the Figma's concept in our engine?
Yeah. I think the solution I had in the past was a lot like Figma, but
Does that work like Figma before when you try it?
yeah, it's like that, where like what we build, I would say, like, I think on Starhawk, all I had was a wireframe view frustum of everyone's camera, and they were all slightly different colors. But I had to be on video or voice chat with everyone that was working with me to even know what color they were. They had to tell me, well, I'm the green one, right? And then at Max Play, we were like, okay, but we can put avatars, like 2D avatars on the camera. So I can see that that's Nick or Ken or Guthrie, right? And that helped a lot because now I have color reference, I have this icon reference, and then we had to transfer that color to highlights on the things that were selected. And then we had to build in locking so that things that were selected were locked from other people's selections. So we had to build filtering in. And it became rather complex pretty quickly. And you can imagine in Figma, if you had 100 people, like he's saying in a Google Doc, it would just be chaos, right? And you could stomp each other's changes very easily. And all it takes is one troll or bad apple to ruin the experience for everybody, right? I also think that it's important to know that like going from 2D representations to 3D is like an exponential difference. So things that work in 2D don't always work as well, or definitely don't work the same way in 3D, right? Or just become much harder to solve in 3D. But we're also talking about 4D because, a Figma document and session lasts as long as I need to build a UX mock or something. But like game development, we're talking scales of years, right? One asset starts and might finish 3 months later or 3 years later, And so it's another scale or the exponential scale of difficulty in solving these problems. But I think it's a good starting point, right? It's looking at the Figma experience.
The other example is Roblox. Roblox is all.
Yeah. Roblox is pretty cool. I went to my godkid's house the other day, and my little goddaughter, Mira, she's 5. She just turned 5. She's like, Uncle Johnny, come play with me. And I'm like, all right, what are we gonna play? She wanted to play Minecraft, but I went up into her room and she had an entire world completely built out of pink cement blocks. And the only decorations were flowers and birds. And we sat around for an hour just making pink castles in Minecraft together. It was a pretty amazing experience. So I think that having that and seeing children engage with and interact with these technologies and solving these problems on their own just by talking in a room while they're doing it together, maybe that's the inspiration that we need for these kind of like experiences. Like John was saying, it's the human element that's important to communication, right? So any other thoughts, questions, topics? No? John's been very quiet. Yeah. Cool. Well, let's see. It's a little early, but that's okay if we're all done. I'm really happy that we spent this much time talking, because I was like, what if we stopped talking like 30 minutes in or something, right? And we made it past an hour, so that's great. Super interesting conversation. Thank you all for coming. And I would love to talk about this more. So let's put a chat room together on Discord or something and keep the conversation going. Yeah. Thank you.